It is the 28th of the 6th, 2025. The time is 3 minutes past 10. There is one thread, F1-centric thread on the docket today, and we've got to talk to it. That is, of course, Max Verstappen's future and how he holds all the cards. This isn't me talking here. This is Max Verstappen and Andrew Benson, by the way. There are loads of F1 journos who are created equally, but some are created more equal than others. We need to talk about it because Andrew Benson of the BBC, of the Checkered Flag podcast, is talking about it. But in the first instance, let's talk about Oscar, because everyone still wants to talk about McLaren and Lando Norris's mental fortitude or lack thereof. Let's roll the clip. This is Oscar Piastri talking about all that he needs to win a driver's championship. Not necessarily preferential treatment, just a fair cop. Roll the clip.
With quite a healthy lead at the moment, do you envisage a time that you'll feel confident enough to ask Andrea and Zach for preferential treatment at some point?
What, a healthy lead in the Drivers' Championship?
Yeah.
Your version of healthy is much bigger than mine. I mean, I think for me, I just want, and we all want, to just have a fair opportunity at trying to win both championships. I think especially in the Drivers' Championship, because it ultimately can only be one of us. I think the situation has to change dramatically to start having those conversations, and they're a very long way away at the moment. So at the moment, all I can ask for is a fair chance to try and win the championship, and that's what I want as well. So no, I'm not willing to enter those talks at all.
Not preferential treatment, because if anyone at McLaren's going to get the preferential treatment, he has a name, and his name is Lando Norris 1.0, aka Dustin from Stranger Things. Why, Rosanna Tennant, do you think they've been bringing all these upgrades with a view to enhance the extent to which Lando Norris feels what the car is doing through the steering wheel? That's not my charge. That's not my lot, Oscar Piastri is saying. I don't need that. I can cope, adapt to the understeery handling dynamic of the MCL 3.9 better than Lando Norris can. Why do you think I'm not taking the suspension upgrade at the front? Because I don't need that. It makes me slower, not quicker, Oscar Piastri saying. If we're having the conversation at the altar of preferential treatment, then you need to point that finger at the other dude on the other side of the garage. All I need, Oscar is saying, is just the fair cop, equal rights and justice as far as McLaren. And I think that's chaotic, chat. I think Oscar Piastri has got this. At least in his own mind, he knows now that he can win this championship, not necessarily because of his speed, performance in absolute terms, not necessarily, but because of his ability to execute in the peakiest of peak moments in F1. Andrew Benson talks about it in the next clip, talking about how he's never in all his time covering the F1 beat seen a driver cooler, more stoic in his demeanour and countenance than one O.J. Piastri. Roll the clip.
The mental isolation that's so impressive about Oscar Piastri, literally nothing gets to him. I honestly think he's the coolest, calmest Formula 1 driver I've probably ever seen. I think only Mika Hakkinen, possibly from McLaren, back in the 90s, would compete. I know people listening will say, oh, what about the Iceman, Kimi Räikkönen? But we heard Kimi Räikkönen get energised and upset on the radio from time to time. Piastri just doesn't seem to get affected by anything. And for Lando Norris, that's really difficult, because it's fine if Piastri's slower than him, but if Piastri's quicker than him, Norris has got a double problem. The problem is he knows he can't affect Piastri with his own performance, because what Piastri's doing at the moment is the weekends where he's quickest, he's winning the race. The weekends when he's not quickest, he's still getting really good points. Whereas the weekends that Norris is quickest, he's not always winning the race. Sometimes he's making mistakes. Think about the first lap in Miami. Think about, this wasn't really a mistake that affected him, but think about driving onto the grass alongside Max Verstappen coming out of the pit lane in Japan. Think about what happened in Canada, qualifying in Canada and the race in Canada. Other qualifying sessions that Norris has talked about where he's just not got his lap together when he looked like the quicker McLaren driver but wasn't. So he's facing the two double-pronged thing, if he can't affect Piastri, but Piastri is affecting him, and he doesn't seem to be able to stop Piastri affecting him. And how he gets out of that conundrum, well, it's going to define his season, whether he can get out of that conundrum.
I think the amazing...
You said it right the second time, Andrew Benson. It's not how, it's if. I'm not sure Lando Norris can get out of this mental fortitude trough, nor is willing even. You've heard him on a gazillion occasions, and I will reference these. This is important. Lando Norris 1.0, writing checks with his mouth that his ass cannot cash. Well, Lewis, you've had the quickest car for a gazillion years now, and it's easy to win when you have the quickest car because you only need to beat your teammate. Well, how's that working out for you now, Lando Norris? He keeps talking these things, saying that he wants to do it his way, that there are all different types of champions as far as their personality type, and I don't think I need to change. What are we talking about, Lando? Do you need any more evidence? Did you not see what happened last race at the Canadian Grand Prix? Do you not see all the mistakes that you keep making in qualifying? You yeeting it into the barrier at Saudi Arabia, Jeddah Corniche. Do we need any more evidence, Lando Norris? I feel like we have a cacophony of that suggests that you might need to change your approach, that you might need to respond to a cheeky DM from Nico Rosberg. Man, who was famous now, who's made a career now of overcoming one of the greatest natural talent deficits in F1 history, 2016 versus one Sir Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton. You're not going to have a conversation with him, the dude who wrote the blueprint on how to do what you are proving incapable of doing. What are we doing here? I think Benson makes a point that this isn't just about Oscars. It's not about necessarily his stoicism, not just about it at least. He's now quicker more often than Lando Norris. Last year, of course, 2024, Lando Norris mollywopped Oscar Piastri in qualifying 20-3. That's material, but there's been something changed. There's been variable material changes year on year. Of course, the handling dynamic of the car has changed. That's one bar of your waterfall analysis. But so too, Oscar Piastri has changed. He's improved. He's quicker. He's managing races better. He's managing his tyres better. He's delivering in qualifying better. And so the pace delta that Lando Norris had last year has done one of these in real time, and so has the pressurized circumstance in which Lando Norris needs to operate and execute. And therein lies Lando's dilemma. Do you want your career to fade to black at the altar of unfulfilled potential, or do you want to be a champion? Because sometimes you've got to make yourself a choice, right? You've got to put on your big boy shorts and understand in real time that there is a tax to be paid, a requisite tax, if indeed you want to win a championship of the driver's variety. And I'm not sure that Lando Norris has had, nor is willing to have that conversation with himself in the accountability mirror. But I digress. Let's talk about Maximilian Verstappen, because Benson, one of the rare few who's properly in the know, has this to say about Toto, the boy who cried wolf, and George Russell, and potentially Max Verstappen next year. Roll the clip.
Speaking to Toto Wolff, the team principal, and Wolff had said to him that he was very happy with his driving, and there's only one driver in the field you could argue about whether he's doing a better job than Russell, and that driver Russell didn't name, but obviously he's talking about Max Verstappen. People might remember a year ago, Toto Wolff made it clear he wanted Verstappen to join Mercedes instead to replace Lewis Hamilton, who was going to Ferrari. And now Russell's contract is up for negotiation, and Wolff's having talks with Verstappen again. That doesn't mean that Verstappen will end up at Mercedes, but it does put Russell in a very vulnerable and stressful situation. I don't know what's going to happen, Rosanna. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but it's pretty clear that we're now Friday of the Austrian Grand Prix, 6 days away from turning up in Silverstone on Thursday. If Wolff's talking to Verstappen ahead of this weekend, or enough that Russell wants to speak about it ahead of this weekend, unless Verstappen turns around in the next day or so and says to Wolff, nah, I'm not going to come after all, then I don't think Russell's going to get a nice British Grand Prix present on that basis.
Given what we know, ladies and gentlemen, the F1 jury, I don't want to say it's a wrap It's not over the line yet. Maximilian Verstappen has all the keys, and I don't think he's made a decision. But if past this prologue, and we know that Maximilian Verstappen is only in F1 to do one thing, win races and therefore championships, which one of those 10 teams currently on the grid, if he has his pick of the litter, as of 2026, new rules and regs, power unit settings, 2014, split turbo hybrid, which one of those teams gives him the best, most robust probability to do that going forward from 2026? I would argue that that team has a name, and that team's name is Mercedes. The boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth, the power unit, the Red Bull Ford powertrains collaboration sounds like it's dead in the water, ladies and gentlemen. At the altar of heritage and legacy, they cannot know, will not know, have not expedited for their learning curve. So why wouldn't Max go over to the Mercedes, to boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth? Toto, the boy who cried wolf, is acutely aware. Now he's coming out in front of the press and media and saying, of course, we're having conversations with Max Verstappen. We can debate all day and night whether that's necessarily too transparent, disrespectful to one King George Russell of Kings Lynn, Norfolk, given the performance that he's put on season to date. You only need to look back to the last race weekend and see that George put 0.15 on Max Verstappen in quali. That, ladies and gentlemen, is insane. A black swan event. I could barely conceive of it, let alone envision nor see it happening. George has been very good, therefore, but Maximilian Verstappen is better. Now, 8 times out of 10, you could argue that it flatters to deceive, but when it's Brazil 24 or Saudi qualifying or Suzuka qualifying this year, Max Verstappen, or potentially Austria qualifying this year, Maximilian Verstappen knows how to make the difference. And I think that's what Toto is obsessed upon. If indeed you have the opportunity to sign yourself a Max Verstappen, you don't miss it again. Not if you're Toto Wolff, with 2015 and the foibles as far as negotiation are still front and centre, fresh in the memory. Roll the next clip.
I've got zero reasons to be worried, but obviously it does help if there was, pen on paper. But yeah, let's see.
Why do you get giggly when people ask you about the contract situation?
Do I get giggly?
Giggly. There's a little sort of giggle and a little sort of
What is that?
eyes. Is it because it's already done and you're hiding it from us?
No, it's not done.
See, there you go again, giggly.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
But you said it would help if you had pen to paper. So why don't you just go and have a little knock on Toto's door?
Because it's not really like I don't need to chase, because I feel that I'm doing a good job. It goes both ways. It's sort of I need them, they need me, and it's sort of that's how it goes. And Mercedes is so ambitious; they want to be back on top. They need to understand and think, how are they going to bring Mercedes back on top? You need to have the best team principal. You need to have the best drivers in your car. You need to have the best engineers within your team. And Toto's made it clear to me that he thinks how I'm performing this year is as good as anybody. I think there's only one driver that is you can debate in terms of performance, and these are his words, these are not my words, so that's why I have no concern about the future. But there's 2 seats to every team, and I guess he needs to think, who are those 2 drivers going to be for those 2 seats? And I guess that's what the delay is.
I think, George, your problem is that Toto has already thought and considered this. Who he wants going forward for that seat is the quickest driver of the 20 currently on the grid, and he has a name. His name, as at June 2025, is Max Verstappen. How very dare Toto, the boy who cried wolf, try and optimise for his circumstance, sacrificing King George Russell of Kings Lynn, Norfolk at that altar Indy. It's chaos, and I don't even like George Russell, but I feel bad for him. Doesn't deserve this. But again, F1 is a piranha's tank, and if you think for a second that Toto, the boy who cried wolf, is not as duplicitous as he's appeared over the past couple of weeks, you only need to go and ask Ross Brawn in the negotiations to take over Mercedes. Brawn GP 2009, Toto, the boy who cried wolf, was nothing less than two-faced. Ross Brawn's words in his book and not mine. Roll the next clip.
Go to Red Bull and Max go to Mercedes?
I can't see Verstappen and Russell being teammates. They don't like each other, is the bottom line. Now, of course, you don't have to like each other to be teammates in Formula One, and that would be, on paper, the most performant, which is a word people like in Formula One, lineup, Russell and Verstappen. But I think that, Verstappen doesn't have to go to Mercedes. He holds all the cards in this negotiation. And there's a lot of ground to cover. The salary, Verstappen's earning something like $75 million a year from Red Bull. That's just his basic salary without endorsements and everything. Are Mercedes willing to pay that sort of money? And if they aren't, would he go? There's also all the baggage that Verstappen brings with him in terms of he likes priority in the team. You've also got the fact that, he's quite a controversial character. Does he fit with the Mercedes brand? In terms of the way he races. So lots of things for Mercedes and Verstappen to talk about. From Verstappen's point of view, if Mercedes did want Russell to be his teammate ideally, then would he countenance that? And then the question for Mercedes, if they're flirting with Verstappen, they'd rather keep Russell because he's the most performing driver. What do they do with Kimi Antonelli, who's Toto Wolff's protege? Only 18. He's had a promising start to his year, but he's still not performing regularly at Russell's level. So there's lots of question marks there. Just because they're having talks, Mercedes and Verstappen, doesn't mean that Verstappen's going to end up there. But it does mean that it's a very real possibility. And I think on the basis that you can't really see Russell and Verstappen working together, then it would obviously mean Russell had to look for a drive.
Go to Red.
Touche, Andrew Benson, Benny, absolutely nailed it. And by the way, to this podcast, there will be a link in the description because it is worth listening to. I concur with Andrew Benson because for the avoidance of doubt, all F1 journeys are created equally, but some are created more equal than others. I don't think it's the most likely eventuality that George and Max end up in the same car. I don't think Max will want for that, and I don't think George will want for that either. Potentially George going to Aston Martin, or potentially going across to the house that Christian Horner built, the Bulls that are red, potentially, as there will be a Max Verstappen sized shape left there for him to fill. Although the guys and girls over at Autosport disagree with the Aston Martin George Russell potential pairing, saying of that's Christian Horner just leaking that rumour with a view to disrupt the waters over at the boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth, cause some rumour and some shenanigans and rancor over there, whilst everybody on the grid is talking about Maximilian Verstappen and his next move. Chaos, ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury. I think over the coming weeks, probably the next 4 or 5 into the summer break, we will get ourselves news pending about what Maximilian Verstappen has decided. Performance clause, understeer setting, the RB21, how close is Maximilian Verstappen behind the Drivers' Championship lead? 43 points if I recall correctly, and that is a lot. You can hear Maximilian Verstappen's tone in real time changing. The probability that I can win a 5th consecutive is diminishing by the day, and so too Max Verstappen's tone. Lest we forget, currently 11 points on his super license. 2 of those will drop off after the Austrian Grand Prix. All of the chaos around the FIA rules for which they're trying to institute now releasing and tying themselves up in culpability, not desperately trying to be transparent, desperately trying to be, endeavouring to be competent. Don't sulk, you're a legend. Max in a neutrally balanced car might be less dominant than everybody thinks. Oh, the humanity. But I mean, it's an interesting one. Don't sulk, because you've got evidence of that, right? 2022, it looked like all of a sudden Checo Perez was right there next to Max Verstappen in an understeer merchant of a car. But they always say of the greatest ones that you give them an oversteery car, and that's how you unlock their avatar state per se. Russell's seat is safe, says Robert. He can sleep tight. He'll get his contract. I don't know if he can, Robert. How? Only if he bribes Max Verstappen and ensures that Max stays at Red Bull. I don't think George can sleep. I think he's doing very well to do what he's doing, notwithstanding the circumstance around his contract. He doesn't have a contract, by the way, for 2026. That's an important piece of the jigsaw puzzle, though. That is insane considering he's been so good. Listen, he can go to wherever he wants to, right? Aston or Red Bull. I think when he's saying he's not worried, not that he's not worried about his Mercedes seat, but that he's not worried about having a seat in Formula One. Robert says, F1 Team RL, his endurance team, and his father's rally career, all that tied to Red Bull, and being an ambassador, of course, he's set with Red Bull. It's Techie Tony. It's 3:15 a.m. You're a legend, Tony, for being up so late. And by the way, we will go live for FP1 in 35 minutes or less. It's going to be techie. It's going to be chaotic. Maximilian Verstappen, so too Red Bull, if they understand the stakes, need their charge, the four-cylinder high-time champion, to go out and get the business done. Because if he doesn't, then Mercedes are going to be sniffing around him. So too Aston Martin. And the probability that Max remains a going concern at the house that Christian Horner built, the Bulls that are red, diminishes materially more and more by the second. Oh, the humanity.